Okay.
Okay, we are live.
Welcome, everyone. This is a reminder that we are live streaming and the meeting is being recorded.
All right. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate you guys continuing to hang out with one another and me on this very, very important work group and the implications of it. December is on the horizon, but we still have many, many more sessions planned. And I will tell you, like, this is one of my favorite moments of being state superintendent is really working on this project. So I really appreciate your guys' time. You really don't get a chance to pitch something to our decision makers to get it right for a group, right? I've been used to in states where they made decisions and they regretted them and they're changing them. So we have a chance to really, build off of and do some great things for our multilingual learners and their families. So we're going to continue on finance. And so a very complex topic. So we are going to make you do some work like last time and give you an activity where you'll get to simulate things. And so Justin is here. We'll have a national entity to come and share what the work that they're doing. So we do have a stakeholder from Michigan, the Michigan State Department of Education, and how they have gone about supporting funding our multilingual learners, the multilingual learners and families of Michigan. And so our guiding question, right, for today is how can Maryland ensure that local education agencies best deploy their funds to support equitable, high quality education for ELs and their families? Today, you'll learn a lot also about other sources. So the last time we met, we made you just work with the money that the English language learners were generating at a specific school. But as some of you brought up, there's other funding sources and they can work in concert with one another. And so we are going to learn about those sources, and then our activity is going to be based around that. I think with that, that's my part, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to the team to introduce our guests. And with that, thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Choduri. You may recall from the meeting last time that we heard from Zahava Stadler, and she told us about the EdBuild report. So one of the key pieces there was we heard about gold states that have unique ways of funding for English learners. So we're very pleased today to have Kelly Alvarez from the Michigan Department of Education. She's the English learner education consultant and also happens to be the president-elect of the National Association of English Learner Program Administrators. So welcome, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be able to share a little bit about the work we've been doing in Michigan. I am the person that works with the Section 41 bilingual education funding. And I've been with the department since 2017, July of 2017. So since the time I've been in the department, we've taken the funding source from 1.2 million up to 25.2 million this year. So had a lot of really nice support from our legislature regarding our English learners and this funding source. So I'd like to share that with you today. If you could, yep, thank you. So the purpose of the funding really is to support, it's a categorical funding source. And so we do see it as a supplemental funding source. It's not part of our general fund kind of funding. And it is only for districts that are administering the WIDA access or the WIDA alternate access. It is this year at $25.2 million. And the kind of unique component to this funding source is that it puts more money towards students that have more need. And so our students that have composite scores of 1 to 1.9 this year were fully funded. This is the first time that the funding source has been fully funded at $935 per student. And then you can see the subsequent funding sources there, or funding amounts per student based on the proficiency level. Our legislature did not put a lot of other requirements on the funding. So it does allow us to kind of meet the need of the state as we see it's required. The only other requirement is that every year the district's supply of fiscal report to the department. And so that's just kind of an overview of how we're working the funding. On the next level, on the next slide, you can see, I just did a quick snapshot of, I didn't go all the way back to the 1.2 million in the 17-18 year. It went from 1.2 to 6 million, and that's where this picks up. Two things happen in that transition. One, I guess the view or the way that it was perceived, the funding source was perceived, changed. It went from only funding bilingual programs. Most of them were bilingual maintenance, early exit programs. That went from funding only 6 of those in the state to being more of a per pupil fund for all English learners in the initially 1 to 2.9, and then over the years it's been opened up to 1 to 3.9 proficiency level range. So you can see there, there's kind of how it's progressed over time. I am really thankful for that slow but steady progression. I think that that's helped our districts get their feet under themselves and be ready to receive the funding. It's when we went from 1.2 to 6 million, there was like, whoa, what are we going to do with this money? How are we going to use it? How are we intentional about using our money? And then as it's kind of grown, they're like, oh no, we've been wanting to get a coach. Now we can get a coach. Now we can get an extra ELD teacher to provide additional supports for our, 1s and 2s, let's say. So I've really been thankful for that, like slow and steady increase. And then you can see, while the law has stated similar amounts of funding year over year, so around the 900s, 600s, and 100 for the different proficiency levels, the allocation didn't permit us, because there's so many kids, we had to prorate. And so what you see there are the actual allocations per year based on the funding source. And then also, I think it's really nice to look at the number of students funded, because we have really increased our reach and the number of students that are benefiting from the funding. And just for perspective, Michigan has around 100,000 English learners. So I just provided this. This is a little document that we use a lot when we're talking with districts about how they can use their funding. And so I just wanted to show this because we don't include Section 41 funds as part of the OCR mandated required services. They are in addition to those required services. So I thought this visual might support you in seeing kind of how we talk to districts about, okay, this is where your general fund needs to be placed. You can use additional funds like Title I and next, and then on top of that, the supplement not supplant provision of Title III layers in. So I just wanted to provide that to you for just a little bit of a visual and kind of see how that categorical funding is layering in. And then lastly are just the allowable and unallowable activities. Very similar to Title III and the allowable and unallowable activities, given the additional nature of the funding and that it is not general fund. It's very much about funding additional staff, professional learning, all of those supplemental resources that districts many times don't have enough funding to purchase with their Title III. Unallowable things, administrative or indirect costs, capital outlay, all that regular bus transportation to and from school, those types of things we don't allow in this funding source. that's really all I had prepared to share with you, but I would be, open to answering any questions that may come up.
Thank you, Kelly. I have a question. So you guys, I noticed the proficiency level. So can you say a little more about that? So Maryland does not do anything around that right now. Yeah, when it comes to funding per pupil and giving a differential because of the proficiency level, there's nothing like that that exists. So can you say a little more about what that looks? Because I think that's where your gold standing kind of brings you up to that level. So if you can talk a little bit more about that and how that works, that would be helpful.
Are you referring to kind of like our internal structures of how we figure it out and allocate?
Well, I think no, because you have your exam, whatever the access. So
Sure.
I guess just talking a little bit more about that and how that has worked and played out, and being able to fund that. And have you noticed that it has reached, it has pushed the conversation around just getting that much more closer to equity, versus where you were before. So if you can just talk more about that, because we have a chance to make recommendations like that. And is this something you guys are like, oh no, or this does work really well and here's why? So.
Yeah, I would say, so I'm really proud of our state in the fact that this funding, I think, has energized and brought and also surfaced our English learners into an area where people are actually, implementing systems and programs that are directed for them. In the past, a lot of people were kind of hesitant to take like Title III funding. They're like, it's such a little amount and it comes with so many rules. There's a lot of beliefs about those types of things. But with Section 41 funding, especially this year with the full funding, we're seeing teachers going back to school to get their ESL endorsements in droves, like so many, because that is one of the professional learning components that are allowed in there. So districts are saying, hey, teachers who wants to get their ESL endorsement, and some districts are sending 30 and 40 teachers back to school. So that's really exciting for us. And it's helping us meet that critical shortage need as well of ESL teachers. The summer school, there's so many activities of summer school, newcomer programs, additional supports for our newcomers. We just resettled, I'm sure Maryland has too, 881 new Afghani students in the last 3 months, and so our schools have really leveraged that funding to transition students. Also parent liaisons and cultural brokers. Those have been real increases that we had not seen in the past that we're seeing now that have just, I don't know, there's just an energy in the state around English learners and there's movement. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Is there, just a follow up to that, are there, can you talk about, so you guys have restrictions around the funding, like it has to go to and used for this, like, can you talk a little bit about what those parameters look like? So that's something in Maryland right now, the way it's designed is like the students generate the dollars and you can't restrict on the front end. Although some would argue you could definitely shape smarter investments, but then on the back end, when they report out, they have to show that they've made them. So how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, so we have a funding source. Our ED funding source in the state is similar to what you just described, and we had that experience where retroactive technical assistance wasn't as powerful as proactive technical assistance. And so we decided to require an application for the funds. I think that single step has really provided us an opportunity to partner with districts to think through what they're putting in their line items, how they're budgeting the funding, those types of things. The law in itself doesn't have any real restrictions on it. And so we have tried to work with our districts to say, okay, let's think about how you're using these funding sources. What are the goals? The other thing that we did in our application is we required each LEA to identify a goal that they're trying to obtain with the funding, and they can pull it right out of their continuous improvement plan. But we're trying to make sure that there's an alignment and intentionality between the continuous improvement efforts and what they're doing with this funding. What we didn't want to see was them to take the funds and just replace the general fund, for their EL teachers. It would have made no impact for kids. So
So the application isn't required. It's something you just do. You
We
guys
do
make the decision as under the leadership of the department said.
Correct.
We're going to require. Okay, but there's nothing in statute that requires it.
correct.
Got it. Okay, good to know. That's great. Any other questions? I mean, just for the work group, we are a little bit above 100,000 English language learners now in our state. We had taken a dip. It went back
Us
up.
too.
And so very similar. Also just some interesting dynamics politically. They have an assembly or legislator who is controlled by a Republican party. We have a Democrat party, but their governor is a Democrat. Our governor is a Republican. So, you can do many great things to take care of English language learners, regardless of ideology. And so I like to share that always because people think like, at the end of the day, you're the party of being kids first, right? Like in focus. And so I appreciate that. So, but I wanted to share that for the work group. So, because it's an interesting dynamic. Any other questions from anyone?
I might share also one artifact that I sent along with the PowerPoint. It was a legislative document that we provided to them in 2020. And we are still seeing the repercussions of that, what we believe to be the advocacy that was provided through that report. And our next steps in Michigan is to get a general fund set aside for English learners, an additional portion of an FTE for the state foundational allowance, in addition to the Section 41. So that's our next step in our equitable funding movement. But
got it. I have one last one since no one's taking it, so I'll take one. Is there something you guys are doing at the state as the State Department for your local school systems that is really helping improve practices for people beyond making sure they have the necessary funding? But is there specific technical assistance you would, if I were asked you to rank, your top 3 things you think is really making a difference?
Yeah.
Obviously the funding is one, but what would you point to? Would you point to ESL certification? What would you point to?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a team of one. And so I've been trying to think about how I can amplify my, impact. And so similar to what your question is, I think it aligns.
Your team of one. Got it.
Yes.
All right. Good to know. All right.
Yes. Very energetic team of one though. But I will say, and this may not be an obvious answer, but it's my answer is monitoring. And I've taken an atypical pose to monitoring. It's more of a technical assistance perspective to monitoring. So what I have seen across our state anyway is high levels of turnover in many districts every year. It's like EL is like the hot potato of every district. It's like pass it around. And so the expertise is lacking. So when we were doing monitoring in a negative way, or in a I don't know if it's a negative, but going in and giving them findings and requiring them to do things.
Gotcha kind of way, right?
Yes. Yeah. In the gotcha. Exactly. And so what I decided to do is do counties at a time. So I invite all the districts in a county to a big meeting, and we do half day of learning and then half day of creating the evidence that is required. And then they take it back and they implement the systems, and then we do another half day and they bring their evidence and we talk, I give them feedback, and we do it more of like a collaborative workshop almost. And so then by the end of a year, I've taken them through 4 days all together, the whole county, which really builds a system of support in the county, and everybody's clear on what the expectations are. And they walk away with 1 finding or 2 findings that they couldn't fix in that year. And it's been the most impactful thing that I can do, I think, for our state.
I thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful as I think through. Our department is also going through a transformation as well, and I'm new, and so I like hearing feedback on what other folks are doing. So,
sure.
May I respond to Kelly there for a second? Kelly, I love that you said that, and it just made me think of how the EL program here has changed in Maryland. I've been in this role for probably about a decade now. And when I first came on board, it really did feel like MSDE. It was an I gotcha with the monitoring. And supervisors, we didn't reach out to MSDE. We'd reach out to each other to find the answers first. And then one of us would be brave enough to ask the question. But since Susan came on board, I don't know how many years ago it was, she's really shifted that, and that's changed the culture. And now the supervisors, we don't even hesitate to reach out to Ilhe, Laurel, or even Susan now that she's at that director level. And I think that's had a bigger impact because now we really feel like it's a team and we can work together. So I just, as a supervisor and you're the state specialist, I want to say thank you for that, because that has had a big difference. And when I come out and be monitored, I actually look forward to it. It's a really great day to sit down and have some conversations about how we are using our money and the programs that we have, and to get the feedback. And it's really nice because I don't dread it. It's really not an I gotcha. It really feels like a team. So thank you for letting me share that.
I think that was more for me, Kelly, than you. So.
Hey, Kelly, how many school systems do you have? Because it's at first it's unusual to hear a county has districts within it, because our districts are counties.
Yeah. I can give you an example of our most populous county has, I think they said 45 school districts and 102 PSAs in one county. So we have 835 school districts and PSAs, together in our state.
So that makes what you say you do even more impressive. That's amazing.
It's actually unusual to have county systems like Maryland.
Right.
Actually more common for have hyper segregated and districts and lines and everything. So Texas has 1,300 guys.
Right.
So and some are literally a donut inside the city, separated from the city. And so it's all kinds of fun times with that structure. And so having a county system is actually less common than not in the country. So
I'm jealous, I'll say that. Seems very clean.
Yes.
Any last questions? If not, we really want to thank you, Kelly. And if you can be okay with us bothering you and asking for resources as we further, our work, because we're ultimately going to have this final report that's going to have that's going to be of consequence for our state. So we will definitely reach out. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all.
Justin, you're up.
Yes, we're going to share a slide soon.
All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody. And again, it's a second echoing of thanks to our colleague up in Michigan. And to that end, grounding that conversation back in Maryland statute, what our numbers look like before we talk and back up into some of the federal programs that can often work in concert with or to drive English learner programming in school systems. I want to revisit this slide. We actually used this in our last conversation, but I think it's helpful to just reorient ourselves to Maryland law, the Maryland per pupil amounts for English learners, and how that works as we go forward for today. So just, on the off chance some of you didn't bring your notes and calculators and everything from last time, figured we give this to you just in case. So as a reminder to everybody, the blueprint formula does provide funding for English learners, and it does so using a per pupil amount. And we multiply that per pupil amount times the number of students who are identified as having, in quote out of the law, limited English proficiency. So the law does define exactly what LEP means in this case, and which students would meet those criteria. It also defines what that per pupil amount is. And the way that Maryland law, just as a reminder, defines that per pupil is in the context of the target foundation amount. So that foundation amount is being phased in over the life of the blueprint program, as is the weight or the amount of that foundation per pupil that goes towards English learners. And so, for example, here coming up in FY23, the weight for the program is 100%. And that means that since the target per pupil foundation amount in 2023 is $8,310 per pupil, the English learner amount per pupil is 100% of that, which is $8,310. Over time, that increases, right? The target per pupil foundation amount increases. However, as the English learner portion gets phased in, that amount comes down. And so by the time this is fully phased in fiscal 33, we're looking at $10,510 per pupil. That comes from the combination of a $12,365 target foundation amount and an 85% weight. And so to contextualize what that means overall, if you could go to the next slide. What we're really looking at here is, even though that percentage is going down, overall, the amount of funds that English learners receive through the blueprint will go up, and it will go up substantially through the life of the phase-in, right? So right now, particularly when you consider the base amount, so again, everybody gets that foundation amount. So when the blueprints, the first year of blueprint formula information was in FY22, it was $7,390, and $7,390 for the base, and then again 100% of that for English learners. So $14,780 per English learner in total between those two pots of funds was available in FY22, right? Obviously, 7,390 of that being specific to English learner weights. Fast forward 10, 11 years from now, we're looking at $22,875 per pupil between the foundation amount and the English learner amount. Now, again, an important reminder here, though, that as much as the base is increasing, the weight, or the dollars, I should say, that are coming from the weight for English learners don't increase at the same rate, right? Because of that reduction in the weight itself, right? We go from 100% down to 85%. It is still substantially more because of the increase in the target per pupil foundation amount. But again, as we pointed out last time, it doesn't rise at the same rate of increased funding over that span. Now, these funds are but one potential fund source. And so, Ilhe, if you could go to the next slide. We recognize that when school systems and school sites are planning their budgets or designing their English learner programs, they're doing so with a combination of resources available to them. And so maximizing those resources becomes really, really important in order to essentially weave together and find the resources needed to support a comprehensive English learner program. And so LEAs, one way that they can do that is through braiding funding. And so when we talk about braiding funding here today, we are referring specifically to taking funding that comes from multiple different kinds of fund sources and using those different fund sources in concert or in conjunction to advance or work toward a particular program, service, or cost. And so in this case, braided funding would allow schools to plan activities for English learners using a combination of fund sources. And that's because, as Ilhe is going to walk us through in a second, there are a whole range of allowable, and not just allowable, but the intent behind many federal programs is to serve these children. Oftentimes, districts or schools can shy away from this approach because it is, no question, it is more challenging. It is a more difficult approach. You have different fund sources. That means you have different sets of allowable expenses. And so there can be a gray area if the planning isn't done in a particular way, or less than a gray area. It can be hard to ascertain or decouple what expenses are occurring and the funds and allowable items of spending are as that's happening throughout the year, absent strong planning in the front end. Similar to that, different fund sources can, not always, but they can also have different reporting and spending deadlines, right? And so here again, if we're talking about state funds, our state fiscal year is July 1 to June 30. Our federal fiscal year, it's October till September 30, right? And so there are different deadlines. That also can make this a challenge. That being said, challenges aside, there is a way, and we are going to talk about that. So a little bit of a teaser trailer for what's coming up here. Artfully maximizing resources, though, first and foremost requires understanding what those funds are. What are the funds? Where do they come from? What are those funds supposed to do? What are we allowed to do? And how do we make sure we are in compliance with the letter of the law and the intent of the law with those funds? So to answer that question first, you're over to my right here, Ilhe. So
Yes.
passing it over to you to continue onward.
So I have honor to talk about federal programs funding. So I will going to start out with Title III, and then we go through Title I to IV. And as we go through this PowerPoint presentation, sorry, if you have any questions, please enter your comments to the chat, and we will also have some time at the end of our presentation to answer any questions that you may have. So for Title III federal funding, the main purpose of this funding is to increase English language proficiency and the attainment of the proficiency, as well as to make sure that ELs achieve at high levels in academic content so that all ELs can meet the same rigorous, challenging academic standards that all students are expected to meet. And we have all those things that we got out of the law, but it kind of encompasses 4 things that I just said. And then the last one is also to making sure that we have parental, family, and community participation so that they are engaged in their children's education so they can be a critical role in their overall success. So that's the whole purpose of it. And then on the next slide, we have the structure of how the fund is used. So Title III Part A fund is a formula grant, and we receive this annually from the U.S. Department of Education. And as you can note, 95% of that federal grant is allocated to local school system or local education agencies. So if they have EL count that meet our criteria, they get this funding. And of that 95% of the fund, we do reserve 10% because we have increasing of immigrant children and youth. So 10% of the 95% is reserved, and then it gets out to local school systems who are eligible. And then the 5% of the total grant is reserved for us at the MSDE or the Maryland State Department of Education to use. And annually, we have 21 to 22 local school systems receiving this grant, mainly because some school systems do not have enough EL count, because we do have a threshold to be able for them to receive this Title III fund. So typically 21, some years 22, and it varies. And as with any federal grants like Title I, Title II, Title IV, we have this supplement and not supplant clause. So these federal grants are made available as a supplement to making sure in the absence of federal, state, and local public funds, LEAs continue to provide support and resources to students. And in this case, in Title III, English learners and immigrant children and youth. Therefore, local school systems are not allowed to use Title III fund to run their English language development program, AKA ESOL services, and also hire ESOL teachers, because if the federal fund stops coming, then the LEA will not be able to run the program, which is required under OCR. So we have to make sure when we work with local school systems, just like what Paula said, it's always in collaboration and talking through how we are going to meet the needs of the English learners. So we're always making sure upfront that here are the allowable activities and here are not allowable activities. And we do have multiple webinars and technical assistance sessions with LEAs so that they have a clear understanding of it. So on the next slide, we have total allocations that went out last school year. So FY22, as you can see, Allegheny, Garrett, and Kent counties did not receive English language acquisition grant because their EL count did not meet the threshold. Usually, the threshold is about 100 students, and Allegheny has about 20 kids. Garrett County just lost a family of 3 students, so now they are down to 4 kids. And Kent County has increase in EL population, so they may be eligible to receive ELA grant maybe in the coming years. And as you can see, Montgomery and Prince George's gets the bulk of funding because they get over $3 million, and they are the 2 LEAs in Maryland that have close to 30,000 students, English learners. In the next slide, we have some required activities that we listed from the law. So basically in Title III, the law says here are 3 buckets that all eligible LEAs must spend fund on, whether that's $1 or not. They have to spend Title III funding on these 3 categories. So making sure that they have effective language instruction educational program. So that's the law language. So what we call is an ESOL services. So in addition to what the county provide, above and beyond that they can do to increase English language proficiency of ELs, they can spend money on that. And then they have to offer effective professional development to all educators of ELs and also stakeholder members. And then lastly, they have to make sure that they have parent, family, and community engagement activities, so they are active participant of their children's education. So those are the 3 activities they have to spend money on. And then once they spend their Title III funding on that, next slide shows some authorized activities. And in many cases, as you can, we didn't have a whole lot of time to look at individual allocations, but most of LEAs do not receive that much fund. So by the time they spend their funding on required activities, they don't have a lot left to spend on authorized activities, but still authorized activities include making sure that you have some improving instruction for ELs with disabilities, and you offer courses or programs to ensure ELs academic success in post-secondary education. And of course, to enhance their existing ESOL program, they could purchase or upgrade curriculum materials or instructional materials, educational softwares, or assessment. And they can also collaborate with other relevant programs and services to make sure all students pre-K through 12 that they can be receiving quality instruction. So on the next slide, we have some examples of what counties or school systems have done with the ELA grant. So the Prince George's County has these 3 categories where they spend the money. So in order to making sure that they have academic or career or technical education, Prince George's County spent Title III funding to run GED option program. So this is like an alternative pathway for ELs that we have, and they have hired teachers and instructional materials for that program. And then the other one that they have done is they are doing workshops for ESOL and the reading English language arts teachers, introducing the best practices for working with ELs. And then they also have a book study for ESOL teachers so that they can improve their instructional strategies and programs. And then the next slide, we have Baltimore County. So after Prince George's and Montgomery County, Baltimore County has the 3rd largest EL population. Now their number drops significantly from Montgomery and Prince George's both having close to 30,000 ELs. Baltimore County has close to 10,000 ELs, but they do receive over $2 million. And after they spend their money on required activities, here are some of the things that they do. So they spend a lot of money on tutoring and after school programs. So Soccer Without Border is an organization where they collaborated together. So this organization is providing tutoring services after school and also during summer. And then also they do the life coaching for these English learners. They also support ELs who want to become and who want to get the zero biliteracy. So they do provide native language support to them. And then the Elevation data platform they bought has the instructional strategy component in it. So they use that to provide professional learning to their content teachers. And then lastly, Caroline County, even though Caroline County has a little over 400 English learners, they do spend their Title III funding on several of these authorized activities by providing before or after and summertime tutoring. And they did buy the Google Voice technology this year. I think this is due to pandemic and they were not able to communicate effectively with parents so that teachers can actually use this tool to communicate directly with their students, parents, and families in their home language. And then they also bought several supplementary materials to support each individual student's needs. So that's what they did in Caroline County. So that's the end of Title III presentation. We don't have any questions. Oh, we do have a question. So Drew said, yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Laura's going to read out loud the questions or comment from Drew.
Drew says I like seeing the Prince George's County Public Schools, Baltimore County Public Schools, and Caroline County Public School examples. I don't know if we can get this information, but I'd like to see how all the different LSSs have used their Title III federal funding and potentially compare it to how other states have used such funding, particularly those states that we have had visit us in the work group. I'm aware of what some of the LSSs have done since I direct some of the PD programs that they use funding towards, but it'd be good to see, if possible, a whole picture of what the whole state uses the funding for.
So we can certainly share what the school systems in Maryland do, and then figure out how we could get some information from the states that we have invited. That's a good point. Sorry, we had to read these questions out loud because this is live streamed, and I don't think the participants in the live streaming could see these comments. Okay, any other questions or comments? Then we can move on to the next one. I'm not an expert on Title I funding, but we do have some information they would like to share. So the Title I funding is basically to provide a financial assistance to LEAs and schools with high numbers of high percentage of children from low-income families to help ensure that all children receive fair, equitable, and high-quality education to close educational achievement gaps and also become successful. So that's the whole purpose of the Title I funding. And then the next slide shows the use of fund and the activities. So just like Title III, it's a formula grant. It's annually awarded to MSDE. And again, 95% of the fund goes to the LEAs, and 5% is reserved for grant administration. And unlike Title III, for Title I, every local education agency, so all 24 school systems are receiving this Title I fund every year. And there are 3 things that they could do using this funding at the school level. So obviously they can provide additional academic support, and then also interventions after school or summer programs. And again, just like in Title III, they have parent and family engagement opportunities that they offer. And a lot of times Title I and Title III offices collaborate on that, so they can have the event or functions together to make sure that all families are invited. And in the next slide, we have the allocation table. And you can see that all 24 local school systems here, and you will notice that the amount is a lot, and I always talk about this. So just for example, Anne Arundel County gets $15 million, and that is more than what we get at the state level as a total, the entire Title III amount that we get from USED. So Title I definitely has a lot more money that they can use for all students, and many of our English learners attend Title I schools in Maryland. And the next slides, we do have some examples, again, just like what we shared in Title III. So the Hartford County Public Schools is a mid-size. They are reaching about 1,000 ELs. And then in the county, using Title I funding, what they have done is they hired a staff, so EL teacher specialists who can work in Title I schools. And of course, they offer translation services with Title I, and then they run before and after school programs. And they do have multiple EL family nights in collaboration with EL Title III office, so that they offer that with Title I, using Title I funds. And then the Queen Anne's County, again, even though their number is not as high, but they are working together really well. So they have hired a supplemental EL tutor, and they have this awesome parent and family engagement specialists who work not only just Title I schools and the Title I students, but because many of English learners in Queen Anne's County attend Title I schools, she works really closely with families and parents of English learners. And they also run district parent advisory committee meetings using Title I to make sure that they are supporting English learners. And they also hired bilingual parent liaison. And of course, parent family engagement specialist and the liaison travel and call a lot, so they do pay for expenses for mileages and phone bills. So these are the two examples that we have for Title I. And if you have any questions on that, you can either unmute yourself and speak, or you can enter your comments or questions in the chat box. Okay, if not, we're going to move into next two titles programs, and Susan's going to take it over.
Thank you, Ilhe. Title II is a program that is used for the most part for professional learning, but it's also available for increasing the number of teachers and hiring teachers. So the purposes here are professional learning, providing low-income and minority students with effective teachers. And here we've provided for you what's defined in ESSA as professional development. And they are not the standalone one day, they are sustained professional development. On the next slide, as we've done before, we're going to provide for you the use of funds, and similar to the funds that Ilhe talked to you about, there's a 95% allocation to the locals and 5% for the state. And we do some principal and teacher leadership, which is 3% set aside. The strategies, as I mentioned, you can recruit and hire effective teachers and principals with these funding. And the rest are aligned to retaining, supporting teachers, and improving the quality through professional learning. We have the allocations here on this slide. This again is a formula grant. Some of the same school systems with large numbers of students are represented here. And then we have some examples. Here in Baltimore City, many of these examples are not EL specific. So again, this is not the entire allocation clearly for Baltimore City schools, but looking at some of the authorized activities that are typically used, you'll see a vast majority of funding is used for mentoring programs and actually hiring teachers, mentors, and coaches, as well as professional learning. There are strategies for recruiting and hiring. They do staff positions specifically for that purpose, and career pathways, and also looking at their credit structure for educators. In the next example with Baltimore County, we did highlight some EL specific activities. They use a lot of funding for professional learning, the SIOP model for teaching English learners, and that's for content teachers. And then the equity and blended learning type of activities do touch on English learners. Under the retaining and providing support, they have induction activities. These are common themes throughout the examples you'll see. Minority recruitment and aspiring leaders, department chairs, they have a robust program for that. And our final county, Montgomery County, again, they have a big chunk of their funding being used to retain and provide support for educators. So they have mentors, consulting teachers. They're working towards managing and mentoring the National Board Certified teachers. And we do see in a lot of the examples, coursework and book studies. So that falls under the professional learning category there. Next slide. I'll pause here if there are any questions for Title II. Finally, Title IV is the one that has to do with well-rounded education, 21st century schools, and support for an academic enrichment, I'm sorry. So the funds are for our school systems to support access to well-rounded education, to improve school conditions and safety, and also there's a technology piece. So of course, aligned to academic achievement and digital literacy. And on the next slide, you'll see that we do have the 95% set aside for local school systems again, 4% for state activities. So it's similar to Title III, only it's specified 4% for state activities, 1% for administration. These allowable activities, as I mentioned, support well-rounded education programs, also safety, school safety and healthy students. So you can see almost all the content areas, particularly the ones that I happen to work with, fall in this area. And then technology, as I mentioned before. Title IV is also a formula grant, and there's, again, a wide range of funding provided to the local school systems. Let's take a look at some examples. So we have Prince George's County again here. In this case, there are some EL specific activities, so well-rounded. They are providing support for students to work to get financial aid for college through completing their FAFSA or the Maryland forms. Also, we have EL enrollment and orientation services, so that falls under the school condition category. And then in technology, this is not an EL specific activity, the Empowered program, which is used to support digital literacy. Washington County, hey Paula, shout out to Washington County. I didn't do this, but here's some funding that is available for the EL reading programs and support. So that falls under the well-rounded category. Culturally responsive teaching and professional development is under the school conditions and student learning category. And finally, in technology, the platform called Learn, which provides equitable ed tech access to all families and students. Again, this is not the entire allocation for Washington County, just some snippets out of their application where
Susan, I think we lost you. So while she's working with her computer, I can just finish this. So the Kent County is also using some funding. Again, it's not just completely for all EL related, but the Zero by Literacy is definitely, and then they are subsidizing it. And then the Center for Equity and Excellence Training, even though we didn't specify EL, that's going to help making sure that educators are working toward reducing implicit bias and increase cultural responsive practices. And then they do the professional learning to support technology for all classrooms. And ELs are in this classroom, so I'm sure that the ELs are going to benefit from that. And I think that is the last slide that we have for Title IV. Yep. So before we move to Justin's exciting exercise, do we have any questions regarding all these title funds and how much that we can use to making sure that we help ELs and their families? If not, Justin, I think you can take it away.
All right. I certainly love it when anybody suggests a funding exercise. It's going to be a super fun exercise. So let's put the fun in funding, everybody, and have a great conversation here about thoughtful grading practices. So one of the things about grading practices here that I mentioned earlier is doing good work around this requires a proactive plan, because for many LEAs, grading and grading well means flipping the budget process on its head a little bit. And so to explain that, I've juxtaposed two ways of approaching this here on the screen. One, most common, and this isn't limited to here in Maryland, right? This is across LEAs across the country, right? We identify state and federal fund allocations. We then get our buckets of funding by those different fund sources. We plan our programs. We then track that spending to ensure correct budget pacing and spending and compliance. In order to do graded planning, we have to start with the plan itself. So design the EL plan, articulate what that is, and particularly identify the resources associated with that. Resources being personnel and non-personnel costs associated with implementing that EL plan. From there, we assign those costs to a particular fund source. So we're kind of working backwards here. Instead of starting with our fund and saying, okay, here's how much we've got, here's what I'm going to use this bucket for. Okay, here's my next bucket. Here's what I've got, here's what I'm going to use it for. Here we're saying, here's what I need to do. Here's the program. Here are the practices, the curriculum, the materials, the people that we are going to use, the resources for this program. Okay. Based on that and knowing that, I can now clearly link those planned costs to these fund sources. Review it to ensure compliance, and then just as before, we're back to tracking our spending and ensuring correct budget pacing. I always like to talk about that budget pacing piece, right? We should always be spending according to plan, seeing that drawdown across the year. So just my push for norming on keeping budget pacing in mind whenever we talk about anything budget related. So today, what I'd like to do for our activity is an extension and a build out of what we started with last time, but doing so here with this concept of braided funding. So just to again, renorm, in case any of you did happen to remember everything from last time, including all these cost breakouts, good for you. On the off chance you don't, here's what they are. So we'll be looking at one school this time only, because the focus is on the braiding part of the activity. So just a note here, we have some cost assumptions for a teacher, whether it's an ESOL teacher, or bilingual teacher, whatever that might be. Those are here. Those include fringe benefits. That's why you see the cost as what it is. Same thing for paraprofessionals. We have some textbook costs, and then these other items you have options to identify in the actual planning itself. And so some of these are going to be ranges, and you'll be able to select from drop down. Others still, you'll be able to identify exactly what that cost is as you might want to. Back to the school that we're looking at. For this one, we're just looking, like I said, at one school. It's an elementary school. We have 348 students enrolled, 80% of whom are Title I eligible. Of that group, 187 students are English learners. We have 23 different languages spoken at the school. 23 different languages spoken at home for the students who are English learners in this school. 30% of those students speak Spanish, 10% Vietnamese, 5% Amharic, and 5% Urdu. The rest is a mix of other home languages. That total school budget is $5.5 million. Within that, though, we have our EL fund allocation, just like last time, of 1.16. That hasn't changed. Now, what I have done, though, is we've added allotments here for Title I Part A, Title II Part A, and Title III Part A. So this school does receive additional funding for these particular students. As I mentioned before, it's 80% Title I eligible. So what we're going to do in this activity, hopefully, is just what I described in the last slide with regard to the process. So in a minute, when we start the activity, everybody, lesson learned for me from last time, we'll put this slide back up so that everybody can reference back to the school demographics. But just for now, Ilhe, can you go ahead and please head over to the next slide for us? Thank you, thank you. So the top portion of the Excel file, so we sent this out in advance of the meeting today, so everybody should have that If you don't, I know we've switched over to Zoom, and so I believe I can actually upload a file if we need to. But I do think everybody has, on the call side of this, does have the file. What you'll see on top here are instructions, and the instructions actually mirror everything last time with one new step, which is to actually identify the expense type from a dropdown. And so I am going to, for the sake of explanation for this part, oh, hey, do you mind if I go ahead and share my screen? Because I'll do this live so people can see it on screen. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll look back to the PowerPoint for reference here. I'm going to zoom in for everybody's eyes and my own eyes. Reference the PowerPoint for the demographics, and we're going to plan out the budget by entering in quantities first, and if it's one of the other categories, price or unit cost here. As we do that, I'll actually do that for us all in a second just to see what that looks like. Just note that you can track your spending as you go. So up top here, this is just going to keep a running update as you make your plans. So you can see the different funding sources that we've identified for this particular school, both state EL funding as well as overall federal funding that you can use for ELs in this exercise. As you start to build out costs, so I'll do one here. Let's say we have one teacher. I will start to see costs identify and populate up here. One thing that's different than last time is the final step, like I mentioned. So I've gone through, I've entered my quantity. It has already told me what my cost is going to be. It hasn't done anything up here yet. Why? Now I have to identify what this expense type is. So this is a drop down. It lists all sorts of different types of expenses that this could be associated with. So in this case, I'm going to say that this is a teacher to and I know I'm going to break a couple rules here because I'm about to use federal funds for personnel, but humor me for the sake of the exercise here. This is improving the instructional program. It will automatically, sorry, it will automatically link the federal fund source. So I have all of these allowable expenses already linked to their respective federal fund source. So once you've actually identified what expense type you're planning here, then it'll populate up top and draw down from your total. So just know when you're planning this, if you put something in here and you're wondering, oh my goodness, I see the total here, but I don't see it showing up top, that's okay. It's probably because you just haven't selected that dropdown yet for what the expense type is. But that's it for the activity here in terms of the structure. So you're going to come in here just like before. One thing you'll note is I do have multiple lines for the same item. That's because I may very well be splitting that funding across different sources. So I may have two teachers here and one teacher here that's serving a different purpose, and as a result, being associated with a different federal fund source. So that's what you're going to want to try and do with this activity. Again, you're doing a very, very small example, kind of bounded example of a graded autonomy exercise. But just as before, think through the items that you might want to include in the design of your English learner program. Build those here. Once you have that, identify the expense associated with that planned cost. And you'll track how you go. And we'll see how far everybody gets now that we're layering in additional funding rather than what we had last time. So I'm going to, let's see here. Oh, hey, can you go ahead, please, and reshare, if you don't mind?
Before people start, do you guys have any questions? I think there's one in the chat, Justin, to clarify Title III funds for a teacher would supplant, so we can't use that, correct?
That's correct. I was going to say that. Remember what I said earlier? The basic program, it's
Justin apologized. He did apologize.
No, yeah, he was just showing it as an example. But yes, just remember supplant and supplement, because we do have to think about that. So there are other categories you can spend Title III fund, or you can use Title I funding for teachers. But
so does everyone have it? I'm assuming you do. If not, just speak out and we'll make sure you have the Excel sheet. And then you have the school projected here in front of you. And then we'll give you some work time. How much do they have, Justin?
They
It's
have
407 right now.
Yeah, so we have quite a bit of time, but we'll give you, about, let's say like 20 minutes or so, or 15-20 minutes to like play with it and get it. We'll regroup around 15 and see where you guys are at, and then we'll have a discussion. And then we have one more piece with you, but just as a heads up, because I do like cold calling sometimes, so I'll cold call you to see. It's okay if you don't finish. We are more interested in your thinking about this, and how you thought about it or went about it and what kinds of implications it has, as well as for our external audiences and things like that. So it's okay if you don't finish. It's okay if you only go to some of it. So definitely take it in, and then we'll regroup. Sounds good.
one quick additional note to everybody. There is one allowable expense category. It's non-federal use. It's the last one in the drop-down menu. That's the one you're going to want to use if you're using state funds. So because state funds for the English Learner Program by law are not restricted, that is one bucket of allowable expense in this activity. So if you're looking to trigger a cost associated with your state fund appropriation or allocation here, use the non-federal use option in the dropdown.
Hi, everyone. This is Drew. I just have one final question. For those of us not directly doing budgeting in K-12, are there any other restrictions we need to know about? Title I can only be this, Title III can only be that while we're going through. I know what Ilhay just said, can't use Title III for teachers. I get that. Is there anything else we need to know for those of us who are not in this arena on a daily basis?
So you'll notice in this one, actually, Ilhay, I'm sorry, can I grab the screen back one more time?
Yes, you can share. We'll stop sharing. Yep.
Okay. It's a great question. And that's actually why we pre-populated the dropdown here. So this is where you'll know, these are a list of allowable uses. And so you don't need to worry about what fund source that is. Once you click the allowable use based on what you have in mind with that activity or resource, it'll automatically link the federal fund source. If you are curious, on the second tab here, this is actually where that populates from, and it does have a list of the fund sources. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just an abbreviated one for this activity. But to answer your question, these, in terms of allowable uses, are allowable by these various categories.
So Justin, can I just piggyback on what Drew said? So can you go back to the first sheet? Yeah. So here we have, so for example, yes, hiring your core instructional program, which is ESOL services that we call here. So you cannot really hire ESOL teachers, right? The only way that you can hire an ESOL teacher is you have 10 ESOL teachers, suddenly you have increase in population, your budget cycle hasn't started for next school year, you have some funding in Title III, then it's okay. And like a paraprofessionals, you are able to do that because that's above and beyond regular basic program. Now, curriculum writing also can be tricky. So if the curriculum writing is done at the county level for all content subjects, you cannot use Title III fund to write ESOL curriculum. ESOL should be a part of the whole curriculum writing. But if you are to write above and beyond, let's say you're going to offer a newcomer program in addition to their regular ESOL program, yes, you can use Title III funding to do that. Textbooks, core program textbooks, no. Supplementary textbooks, yes. So within it, you have some leeway. So for now, I think for the sake of exercise, you can just kind of go ahead and use whatever funding and then additional funding that we have here just to get the idea, and then you will definitely have more funding to play this time than last time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. I think we should plan to come back here in just a minute or so. So just a quick call out to everybody. Take maybe another 60 seconds here and we'll pull everybody back in. All right, everybody. Come on back if you're not already. And Superintendent, do you want to open up with, I know you said you wanted a cold call, so.
Yeah, sure. Well, is everyone back? Looks like they are. Anyone want to go first before I cold call? Okay, I guess I will cold call then. Oh, I think Connor went first last time too, so there you go.
Yeah, so last time I felt like I like more or less like accomplished what I set out to do. I definitely did not this time. And I immediately abandoned everything Justin told us to do and like just started trying to spend down like by bucket, right? And so what my thinking was to approach it from like a truly, supplement, not supplant approach. So I'll go ahead and spend all of my local and state funding first. We'll just get that out of the way, and then I'll go back and try to kind of add on other elements. So it was easy to, I'm not going to share my screen because it didn't come out the way I wanted it to, but I put 7 teachers under non-federal use and then 8 paraprofessionals, which left me with a handful of dollars that local and state dollars that I put into basically I tried to go through each category and have at least a little bit of non-federal spending, in part because it felt like the way I could justify doing federal spending in those categories, right? Because then it could show that I was putting some local dollars in and then supplementing with additional. But I saw Drew's question in the chat right as I came back. I mean, I realized at some level I was just just guessing what might fall under shared district costs. At one point, I was trying to convince myself that I was going to use some of the extra Title III dollars and the Title I dollars, all of them, to just sort of go towards what I was hoping would count as a pre-K program. We were going to launch it as a district, and I was going to give some of my federal school level dollars for that. But again, I feel like I probably got us under consent decree by the time I was done and in serious trouble. So all I would say is that, I immediately started to run into trouble trying to figure out just trying to spend down Title III without any strategy at all.
Got it. Just really quickly, Connor, so you definitely are investing in teachers as much as possible to put an adult and reduce that ratio as much as possible. What is your next level thing after, if you had all the teachers that you think is just the right amount, what's your next thinking on that? What would you invest that in, or where do you go from there? I would be curious about that. What would you share?
Yeah. I think the early ed investments, that was my only other good idea. I think I said this last time, my understanding of the research and my anecdotal experience as a researcher is that most of the ed tech we invest in this space that is directly used by students is not in and of itself very effective at advancing their language acquisition. It is very effective, for instance, at keeping kids occupied while teachers do targeted instruction for small groups. So I'd invest a little there. And I think, you want, I think, above a certain baseline of investment in some of the supplies and textbooks and basic literacy materials. But I think the strongest piece of research we have here that we could put funds towards is the early ed investments. So basically, every study shows, even in studies that show that our universal pre-K program or our targeted pre-K program is not getting the results we want it to get, in almost every study we've ever done, the group that gets the best benefit from these programs is the group that is closest to English learners. We don't always have that variable. Sometimes it's speaks a non-English language at home. Sometimes it's children of immigrant, but that category always benefits the most. So that's where I would put the dollars next.
Got it. Thank you. We'll go to Paula.
Well, I just wanted you to know I was going to volunteer.
Oh, okay. There you go. Thank you for,
We're both right.
but I was going to pick on you anyway, since you have great conversations with a non-monitoring MSDE style. So you should be well equipped on this exercise.
Thanks, Mr. Chaudhary. I didn't get finished
Okay.
like Connor, but my first goal was to have a quality student-teacher ratio. So I looked at, there's 187 students. If we hired 9 EL teachers, that would roughly be 20 students to a teacher, which would be heavenly in a regular world. And it would be great if we could even do a little bit more. I added an additional teacher to either be an instructional coach or to work with parents to be a liaison with that. I think that's really powerful in our Title I schools. We don't really use EL professionals in Washington County. This is where we usually use tutors from our Title III funding. So that's where my mind went, that I like to use a lot of tutors. I was also thinking, if it's Title III, I don't believe this Title III is the allotment just for this school, right? Is that the whole district allotment? So as the supervisor, I'm like, we don't want to spend all of our Title III funding on one school when I have 44 other schools that I also need to support. So I didn't want to do. So that kind of goes along with what Connor was saying earlier, that he wanted to make sure he was using the state funding first and then using the other sources as supplemental. I went big with curriculum writing, thinking that collaboration between the EL teacher and the classroom teacher needs to be powerful. So I build in at least one day a month for them to work together in teams with 30 teachers, and then 5 days over the summer for them to work just on writing curriculum. And then another with the same amount for professional development, maybe allotting like twice a month for them to meet for an hour or two. So they would have opportunities to learn PSYOP, or just to even sit down and have conversations, data-driven conversations with the teachers and about their students and where they're going, and use that data to drive their instruction. For supplies and materials, I just took the number of students, and I was shooting for like $100 a student, but because the drop down only went to 50, I put it in there twice to come up with that. And again, this is per student for the language learning software. There's been, it shouldn't be $5, it should be whatever I meant to put 15 there. But anyway, and we probably actually even spend a little bit more on that. There's some really great programs out there, Reading A to Z, and some other materials. And that's really just as far as I got.
Got it. Thank you. Justin, you want to say how Paula cracked your Excel sheet by figuring out something?
I tried to break it and I couldn't, and you did, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, Paula.
I even tried it too. So wow.
I did kind of have a follow-up question based on what I've seen and heard, if that's okay, which is, I'm wondering, as an unintended consequence of this, and Connor, you kind of alluded to this as well, in part in your question about supplement, not supplant. Does the activity of grading and approaching it this way in any way make clearly demonstrating supplement and not supplanting easier than when you're trying to plan federal resources disparately from your state and local fund resources?
And I think that kind of goes with what Drew said. And what I'm not very good at responding the grading fund, because I get sometimes questions from locals and I just kind of say it in a way, but I am not 100%. So like shared district costs, like examples that I have given in the past, like for example, they have a lot of most school systems have a lot of Title I fund. And because we have a lot of English learners attending Title I schools, and that's when we say Title I doesn't have a rule on you cannot hire ESOL teachers. So some school systems use Title I funds to serve ELs. So in addition to what ESOL office or the counties provide, they have hired ESOL teachers or ESOL coaches. So then these coaches will go around Title I schools and work with content teachers. So that's where I have advised most of my supervisors, or like parent-family engagement activities. That's something that they definitely need to collaborate and work together. But this is something, if we're going to put out some guidance, this is something that we definitely need to think more about, to list allowable activities, how they grade and all that. So I probably need lots of help from you, Justin.
Hey, can I just add to that? Because I work really closely with our Title I office here, and they're great. My understanding is that they're reluctant to use that to hire an EL teacher, because they, if I get it correctly here, they have to submit a report that shows that the district is doing their fair share. And so if the ESOL teacher ratio is higher in the Title I schools than the non-Title I schools, and the Title I schools are contributing to that, then there's an issue with that. Do you know what I mean? Like, they actually have to give the numbers of every year to the Title I office. I have to give the number of ESOL teachers and their allocation in every school in the district, and then point out the Title I to make sure that the ratio, that the district is doing their fair share. So I just am questioning if they really can use that to hire additional ESOL teachers. And I don't know the answer.
That's a good point. I don't really know the answer. And then, like,
well, you can't hire all of your ESOL teachers in the school system using Title I funding, but you can supplement with adding additional ESOL teachers. Some of the examples, Ilhe gave the example when there's
like Hartford County, I think. Yeah.
You know, and when there's an enrollment burst, if you will, you can do it. Or if it goes into the supplement, not supplant mode.
Well, and you know, there are two kind of pieces in play here too, right? It's the planning and the intentionality of the planning, and how you are thoughtful and intentional with which funding sources you use and in what way as they map to those costs. But also, you know, in the past when I've worked with LEAs, one consistent piece of advice I've given for supplement and supplant is the clearer that you are as a school district in your resource allocation model, right? Here at the state, we have our state aid formula, right? We've talked a lot about the English learner portion of the formula. It is X times Y equals this, right? School systems often use similar, albeit different, methodologies to allocate resources to schools. X teachers per student, right? You know, we're going to allocate general fund teachers at a 22-to-1 ratio. Here's the number of students you have, here's the number of teachers you have, right? So there's that process in place. And so to the extent that LEAs articulate what those rules are and are really clear and have a clearly defined and transparent process about the method for allocating resources to schools, it becomes much easier to demonstrate supplement, not supplant, because you can say, here's the method that we use for providing our resources. Clearly, we can demonstrate that what we are doing here is supplanting, or sorry, not supplanting, but is indeed supplementing what we already have, because this is the formula we use for all of that other work. And, you know, that's what, you know, and I'm noticing that this conversation sort of ties into, wow, now we're not looking at these as separate buckets, but we're also now looking at this part together as well. So it makes that, I think, might hopefully make some of that conversation a little bit easier. The other just clarification, Drew, you had a question about what some different types of shared services could be. And I just, this would be like, for example, if the system had an English language learner coordinator at the central office level who might support multiple sites, for which the different schools would carry a portion of that cost. Because that coordinator might be serving 3 or 4 schools, their salary might be split across 3 or 4 different schools. Some school systems don't always do that. They might just say, okay, well, this is a central office cost. This is where it goes. I think in Maryland, we're going to see that shifting. They're going to have to, right? Because as we talked about last time, the Department of Education, even though we can't restrict funds to use, we will still need to see that both at a budget and at a spent level, resources of minimum school funding is being allocated to each school based at a per pupil level for these different aid categories, including English learners. And so in order to get to 75%, they're going to need to be assigning central office expenditures down to school level costs. And so schools, more and more, and it's one of the reasons that I put that on the spreadsheet, is to, again, try and start to normalize thinking about shared district services within a school's budget.
I think the only other thing I'll ask, Drew, you don't have to share your entire thing, but just as someone who has not necessarily, as you were saying, I'm not familiar with these things, but part of it is bringing more transparency to the public around how money works. And so what is, as you did this exercise, what is, what did you do, or what was revealing or challenging? I think that perspective will be helpful. As also you're a researcher as well. And so why don't you share a little bit before we move on to our next section?
Well, I appreciate that, Superintendent. Thank you. This was difficult because I don't understand all of the specifics. My budgeting world is an IHE world, not the school district world. So I did not understand half of what was going on here. And I have not done curriculum writing in about 15 years since I was last teaching. So that was difficult. My whole thing that I was thinking about was, where do we put in partnership PDs with IHEs? I have to be honest, I've done so many different types of partnerships with various different school systems around the state. And I've also talked with people on the side in my other capacities, Maryland TESOL, other committees, with people who've done just PDs within the county themselves. There's a difference in what you get out of them. And I do appreciate what county PD can do and how it can reach various people. But for some areas with regards to ESOL, we really need to have more of that partnership. So I really want to see more of that, in addition to hiring more teachers. And actually, ironically, I had the same number as Connor did. I had the 9-8 number when I put that down for paras and teachers. But where do we see more opportunities for, we want to do direct partnerships with the IHEs to really bring together the different entities in the state of Maryland towards the common cause of helping English learners. I was looking everywhere. I was like, well, I know it's Title III. I know it's Title III funding that does that, because again, I worked with already many school districts that have those programs. But where would that be in this budgeting as well?
How about Title II? How about Title II also?
Oh, were the Title II funds there? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Professional learning.
So actually, Susan, that's a question.
So for all teachers, not just ESOL teachers, but all teachers in the building. Yes.
So then that's a question I have, Susan, is can we just combine those two for PD? Is that even possible to do that? Or do they have to be
I think that's the definition of braiding, isn't it, Justin?
Yep.
That's exactly
I
right.
see nodding heads. Mr. Choudhury's nodding his head. Yes.
Like
See, you know more about it than you thought, Drew.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I would like to see more opportunities, because very often I'm talking with supervisors or people in the central offices in the school districts, and they're like, oh, we didn't even think about that. These are questions I'm getting outside of the big English learner school districts. So for example, Prince George's, Montgomery, Baltimore, they're already thinking about this. The other school districts where the English learner populations are beginning to really increase, and they're not even thinking about, well, yeah, I guess we could do that, but UMD is so far away, or UMBC or whoever. They're not realizing what these IHEs can actually offer and the nature of the partnership. So I'm just wondering if the school districts, the school systems are even considering that they could do that with their funding. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know Paul and I have had numerous conversations about this with Washington County. I'm just wondering if that's even on people's radars in certain school districts.
So I have one comment on this. So in terms of using Title III funding, I do know, because I read their applications. So the bigger counties where they get a lot more money, because Title III funding is very small in terms of the amount compared to other grants. So the larger counties are able to use Title III funding to do that. But the smaller counties, there's no way that the we did like $20,000, $30,000. They don't have a chance to do that. And just like what Susan says, that's when the Title II money can come in. Grading it, I mean, they might not be able to contribute much from the Title III end, but Title II funding definitely is something that they could use to do what you were talking about.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's we can we go on to our, I think the conversation naturally has gone into our next section of
Absolutely.
which is the recommendations coming out of this exercise. So we spent the last two sessions really focused on funding, and we'll be leaving funding and going off to another topic. We started off this after the break. We started off with over our secondary students, then we moved into funding. But as you guys have done this exercise and have heard from our guest speakers, what is something we want to document, because as we continue to formulate recommendations, that's top of mind for you guys. So one thing, right off the bat I heard is like just being able to, leverage partnerships with IHEs and universities and what that looks like versus thinking that you have to, go buy something off the shelf, or, you have to figure it out yourself locally. So that is one thing that I've heard in terms of braiding, right? The concept of braiding can be very powerful. And, but there's a lot of, can I do this? Can I not? And I think, it's going to be important for MSDE to basically be able to say, here's all the things you can do. And here we're going to provide guidance and, and a framework for you to be able to try these things out. And you're not going to get in trouble for it because it's allowable. And so I think that's important. Obviously, very clearly, right? The more you can drop the ratio, the more amazing adults you can bring around kids, the better. And so that's clearly something that has emerged. Anything else you guys would want to share as we leave the funding world? One thing that I have been thinking about is just, okay, you saw where Maryland ranks in terms of what the blueprint is doing. When we heard from Zahava, it is a fairly progressive investment. It's not gold, right? In terms of what we see Michigan doing, it's not taking into account things like proficiency levels. And it's not as, it doesn't restrict funds as other states do in terms of how funding gets doled out on the front end. So what else would you guys recommend? So we wanted to just capture some for today. So anyone can go first.
I'll go ahead, Mr. Chaudhary. I put a link in the chat, and we had an MSDE EL briefing recently with all of the supervisors. And as Ilhe and Laurel and Susan were sharing out what's been happening on the EL Blueprint Committee, some supervisors started providing some feedback. So I created a little Google form and sent it out to all of the supervisors around the state. They only had a couple of days, so we didn't get a ton of feedback, but this is the feedback that I got, and I used our guiding question. That was the only question on the Google form. And I'll just share my screen. Is that okay if I share my screen?
Yes, go ahead, Paula.
That and we can definitely, you can continue to gather feedback on this and shoot it back. This is not their only window ever. We have.
I just wanted to make sure I had something to show the group today. So I appreciate the extended window, and I'll send a reminder. So I saw a theme throughout, and that was staff ratio, that they would like to see maybe something from the state level that just shows that there needs to be a baseline teacher-student ratio. I think New York State does something along the lines somebody had said to me personally, but it's not on the sheet. Making sure that the funds that when they're sent to the individual schools, they're based on the ELs, and we saw that today and the last time from Justin's exercises. And then I guess supervisors to monitor the funds to make sure they are being spent correctly. The other one is requiring school systems to have that minimum teacher to student ratio again. That seemed to be the resounding thing, and making sure that the districts are accountable to how the funding. That seems to be the overarching theme. I also just wanted to add in here, since it came up. I'm trying to stop sharing my screen. Am I still sharing my screen?
You are sharing.
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. I apologize.
You were going
Since it's kind of connected to the staff ratio and the budget there, we're in prime time hiring season right now. And I thought it would be kind of nice to have maybe some kind of a stipend for teachers or folks who want to become teachers who are maybe career changers to come in ESOL. Because some of the districts have, when they give an emergency certification, they don't get the regular pay as a certified teacher does. There's usually like a step below. And so we have teachers who are working full-time, getting paid less and going to college to try to get that. So I'm wondering if there was any like stipend or funding to help support those people so they could get paid equally until they get that emergency certification. And I'm just gonna, this is not related to funding, but I really don't have any applicants for EL teachers. I maybe have 2 or 3 in the pool. We are having a really hard time getting even people just to apply, even if they're qualified or not. And this year I've had 2 really wonderful substitute teachers and EL tutors who would be fantastic, but they did all of their education overseas, most of the education overseas. One is a native speaker of India who has her PhD from an Ivy League school. She wants to become an EL teacher, but the ESOL certification coming right out of the gate, not as an endorsement, is a 36 credit program, which is basically another degree. So here we have a wonderful teacher who has a PhD who has to go back and get another degree just to get the ESOL certification. And get paid less because she's going to be below that step. And the other person that we have was trained in South America, not a PhD, but she has lots of experience in the credentials, but right now it just doesn't add up. So I just wanted to throw that out there about just how difficult an initial certification in ESOL really is. And just that we desperately need people to apply for jobs and teach.
No, I appreciate that. Certification is definitely hot right now. There's a lot, there's draft regs out. There's what the blueprint wants to envision, which is adding in layers while at the same time, as a country coming out of COVID, less people becoming interested in wanting to go into education. Coupled with when you start disaggregating that by how many people want to be special education teachers or in regions or areas where you need more ESL teachers or ESOL teachers. And then I'm a middle school person. When you look at just middle school, how many people want to go into middle school? That alone is a mini crisis as well. I mean, when I have visited schools and have done shadows, the most long-term vacancies I've seen so far have been in the middle schools. And so I appreciate all that feedback. I am of the philosophy of finding more pathways to help people become teachers and then having a more rigorous induction experience with a guaranteed high quality mentor, and then using that as truly ultimately the judge of whether or not this person can continue to be a teacher. Like frankly, whether you came in with a 4.0, 3.5, even a 2.7, even if you did, I'm talking GPAs, no one talks about GPAs after you become an adult and start working, but it's induction and that mentorship really is the make or break for me, but we don't have that system yet. So I am thinking through it. I have said, as designed right now, licensure is not it doesn't have it right. So I appreciate it. The one other thing I would appreciate in that supervisor's comment is districts should not only get money, but they should also be held accountable how to spend. As state superintendent, to hear that from districts, I'm going to say, I didn't say it, they did. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share that. Thank you.
Of course. Anything else from anyone else that you guys, for the good of the order? Connor?
Yeah, I've got one weird technical one, I think. I did not know that Michigan had indexed per student EL funding by proficiency levels. And I'm a product of Kalamazoo Public Schools in Michigan. I'm really just astonished that they have that. I'm really impressed by the state. This is the kind of thing that people like me have been suggesting would be a good idea for a long time. That said, for some reason, seeing it actually in place, something occurred to me that had never occurred to me all the other times that I've said we should do something like this, which was that my understanding of the research at this point is that we roughly 3/4 of English learners in U.S. schools, who begin at kindergarten, exit by the time they're hitting middle school, and that the remaining quarter is the long-term English learner population that tends to not exit ever. So something occurred to me that I know we also find in the research that a lot of LTELs, long-term English learners, stall out roughly in those higher English language proficiency levels. And so it occurs to me that you might want, if you do an indexed system like that, you have a situation where you have a relatively significant chunk of your kids in concentrated amounts, large numbers of them, in a particular school where the funding starts cutting down as they're all stalled out in the level 3.5 to 4 range or something like that. And they're not making that last, WIDA level of growth. So that the state might want to have some kind of like bonus supplemental type, like some sort of a concentration of long-term English learner like fund that could drop an extra piece of funding on top of a school where they seem to have a growing number of those students. And the specific mechanism of how you counteract that is going to be up to a lot of people, but it occurred to me that that's a weakness in that funding formula that I've never really thought of before.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. You read my mind a bit because, on the younger grades, they're coming in, you're not necessarily getting the proficiency level and where they're at. And a lot of students do exit if you successfully do a quality program. But on the upper grades, like we need more differentiation, especially for LTELs and things like that. So I'm going to have fun with this recommendation. And so we got to think about how it builds off of the blueprint. We may even bring Zahava back because she's really nerds out on this kind of stuff. I think other than that, if we don't have anything else, I'll move on to our last couple of slides. There's an event I did want to highlight for you guys as well that's coming up. So we have our next meeting coming up on June 23rd. And we last meeting you met the group community well, and their whole purpose in forming was making sure we do a good job with our recommendations for what we ultimately do. And I appreciate that and their passion. And so, and you may have, last time you heard, like they said, we're going to do an event. And he said, I hope you come. And I was like, of course I'm going to be there. It's like, it was my idea. And so I want to come. And so I will be there. And so here it is. That event is coming up next week. So if you want to listen in, it's going to be a large group and then we're going to break out into small groups, but you can just listen in at your convenience. And if you wanted to be in a small group, let us know, but just further making sure we are engaging as well, all of our stakeholders, both outside of the work group as well as inviting them and giving them space in the work group. So that's the last part. And then finally, I think, we are still in strategic planning mode, and I keep pushing out our survey. Obviously, Connor, don't push it out to DC folks because that's not the same. Push it out only to Maryland folks, although I'm sure there's people who live in the state and work out there. But outside of that, my original goal was, because, we're doing roundtables, we're doing a lot of other qualitative type activities. The survey is one of many things. Original goals was 15,000. We're approaching 17,000. So I've moved it up to, I'd like to get 20,000 as like a strong sample size. The one thing that I'm not getting is more folks who are representative of ESOL, communities and stakeholders. So let's make sure we can get that out there. It's in 10 plus, 12 plus different languages. And so we can definitely, it's just not getting to them as I would like. So just as a heads up on that. With that, I think we're good. Did I miss anything, team? If not, I really appreciate your guys' time. And I'm gonna let you out a minute early. It's 4:59.
Oh, and then I will be sending out the information about community well listening session tomorrow morning. I didn't want to confuse you guys. So we'll send the link and everything tomorrow morning. So you have that as well in the email.
Got it. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you. I'm not kidding when I say this is one of those, the job is, there's a lot of things that are like, man, why am I sucked into this right now, but this is the thing that keeps me like rooted and focused on like what we're doing. So I really appreciate you guys continue to dedicate time to this. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend and everything else. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.